3:33 a.m. Living alone in a small apartment in the suburbs, I thought I had a handle on my life. But what happened to me, I wouldn't wish on anyone. You see, every night at exactly 3:30 a.m., I receive a text from my dead brother's phone. And trust me, it's impossible because I keep his phone turned off and locked away in a drawer. My name is Mark, and my brother Eric and I were inseparable until he died in a car accident a year ago. We had a fight a week before he passed, and I've never forgiven myself for the harsh words we exchanged. His old phone is my keepsake, a piece of him I can't let go of, but I swear it's always off. It all started one cold, quiet night. The kind of night where everything feels still, almost too still. I was jolted awake by the sound of a text message. Groggy and annoyed, I grabbed my phone, squinting at the bright screen. "I need to talk to you," the message read. I froze. The message was from Eric's number. What the hell? I muttered to myself, sitting up in bed. I checked the drawer where I kept his phone, just to be sure. It was still there, untouched and off. My heart pounded. Was someone playing a sick joke? The next night, it happened again. Same time, same message. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I had decided to visit Eric's grave the following day. It felt like the right thing to do, maybe to get some peace. At the cemetery, the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. I knelt by Eric's tombstone, feeling the chills seep through my jeans. "I don't know what's happening, Eric. I'm scared, man," I whispered, my voice breaking. As I stood up to leave, an old caretaker approached me. His face weathered like the surrounding stones. "Some things are best left buried," he said, his voice raspy. His eyes held a strange, knowing look. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he just shook his head and walked away, leaving me more unsettled than before. I couldn't shake his words or the texts. Something was very wrong. The next few nights, I barely slept. The text kept coming at 3:33 a.m., each one identical. "I need to talk to you." It was driving me crazy. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, as I was returning from work, I noticed something odd. My apartment felt colder than usual, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible. I checked the thermostat. It read a normal temperature, but the chill persisted, creeping under my skin. "Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks," I muttered, rubbing my arms for warmth. As I moved through the apartment, I saw shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, vanishing the moment I tried to focus on them. The air seemed heavier, pressing down on me. I tried to shake off the feeling and decided to distract myself by watching TV. But the static buzzed louder than usual, like a low, insistent whisper. One night, I sat on my couch, the silence almost suffocating. My eyes were heavy, but I was too wired to sleep. Then I heard it, a faint scratching noise coming from the drawer where Eric's phone was kept. My skin prickled. I slowly opened the drawer, my hand trembling. The phone lay there, still off, but it felt wrong, like it shouldn't be there. I slammed the drawer shut and backed away, my heart racing. The silence was thick, every sound amplified in the stillness of my apartment. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to get out of there, but I couldn't move. It was as if something were holding me in place, demanding my attention. I decided to call my best friend, Tom. We hadn't talked much since Eric's death. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mark. What's up?" Tom's voice was a comforting sound in the unsettling quiet of my apartment. "I know this sounds crazy, but I keep getting texts from Eric's number at 3:33 a.m. every night." I blurted out, my voice shaking. "Are you serious? That's messed up, man. You sure it's not a prank?" Tom asked, concern lacing his words. "I'm sure. His phone's been off since he died. It's impossible, Tom. I replied, desperation creeping into my tone. Maybe you should get rid of the phone. I mean, if it's causing you this much stress, Tom suggested. I can't. It's all I have left of him, I whispered, tears welling up. Tom sighed. All right, man. But be careful. Sometimes the past is best left alone. As I hung up, his words echoed in my mind. The past is best left alone. But it was too late for that. The past was reaching out to me, and I had to know why. I just hoped I wouldn't regret it. After my conversation with Tom, I tried to carry on with life, but the texts kept coming, always at 3:33 a.m. Each message felt like a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I couldn't concentrate at work, and my colleagues noticed. My boss called me into his office one afternoon. Mark, your work has been slipping. Is everything okay? Mr. Daniels asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I'm sorry, sir. Just dealing with some personal stuff, I replied, rubbing the back of my neck. Take some time if you need it. Just make sure you get back on track, he said, offering a tight smile. I nodded, but I knew time off wouldn't solve this. At home, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The shadows seemed darker, the silence louder. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One evening, I called my mom, hoping to find some comfort. Hi, Mom. How are you? I tried to keep my voice steady. Oh, Mark, it's good to hear your voice. I'm fine, just worried about you. You've been so distant, she said, her voice soft and full of concern. I'm sorry. It's just, I've been having a hard time since Eric. My voice trailed off. I know, honey. We all miss him, she said, her voice cracking. Have you been to his grave? Yes. And something weird happened. This caretaker told me that some things are best left buried. It was so strange, I confessed, hoping she'd have some insight. Mark, maybe you should listen to him. Sometimes trying to understand the past can bring more pain than answers, she said gently. I just can't let it go, Mom. It's like Eric is trying to tell me something, I replied, feeling the tears well up. Just be careful, Mark. Promise me that, she pleaded. I will, thanks, Mom, I said, hanging up off. Her words gave me a momentary sense of calm, but it didn't last. That night, as I lay in bed, the phone started buzzing again. This time, the message read, "Come to the old house." My heart pounded. The old house was a place Eric and I used to explore as kids, a decrepit building on the edge of town. I knew I shouldn't go, but I felt an irresistible pull. As I got dressed, I thought about all the times Eric and I had played there, the laughter and the secrets we shared. My mind was a whirl of memories and doubts. When I arrived at the house, it loomed over me like a sinister giant, its windows dark and empty. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but something pushed me forward. Inside, the house was eerily silent. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. I moved through the rooms, each step echoing like a drumbeat. I stopped in front of a door we had never been able to open as kids. Now, it stood ajar, inviting me in. Eric, I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, just the oppressive silence. I entered the room, and my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows. In the center of the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, surrounded by strange symbols and burnt-out candles, was a picture of Eric and me, the edges singed. What is this? I whispered, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. You shouldn't have come here. It was the caretaker, his eyes glinting in the darkness. What's happening? Why am I getting these messages? I demanded, my voice cracking with fear and anger. The past has a way of holding on, especially when it's not at peace, he said cryptically. I need answers, not riddles. I shouted, my frustration boiling over. You might not like the answers you find, he warned before turning and disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, my mind racing. What had Eric gotten into? And why was I being dragged into it? The more I uncovered, the more questions I had. As I left the house, I felt a chill that went deeper than the night air. I couldn't shake the caretaker's words or the haunting image of Eric and me surrounded by those strange symbols. The texts continued, each more desperate than the last. Sleep was a distant memory, and my thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and determination. I had to know what was happening. One evening, as I sat in my darkened apartment, the phone buzzed again. This time the message was different. Meet me at the old house, 3:33 a.m. My pulse quickened. This was it. The moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The night was eerily quiet as I made my way to the old house. The moon cast a pale light on the crumbling structure, making it look even more sinister. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The silence was deafening. I made my way to the room where I had found the picture. My flashlight flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. "Mark? Eric? Is that you?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Yes, it's me. I need your help," the voice replied. But it sounded distorted, as if it were coming from a great distance. "Where are you? What's happening?" I demanded, my fear giving way to a desperate need for answers. "I'm trapped, Mark. You have to find the source," the voice said, fading in and out. "What source? What are you talking about?" I shouted, frustration boiling over. "Find the caretaker. He knows," the voice whispered before fading into silence. My heart pounded as I left the room. I had to find the caretaker, but I had no idea where to start. As I turned to leave, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, and there he was, the caretaker, his eyes glinting with a strange light. "You're looking for answers, but are you ready to face the truth?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "What do you know about my brother? What's happening?" I demanded, my voice a mix of anger and desperation. "He meddled with forces beyond his understanding. Now those forces are reaching out to you," he replied, his tone grave. "Why me? Why now?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Because you're connected by blood and guilt. The past binds you both," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "I don't care about the past. I just want this to stop," I shouted, feeling tears of frustration well up. "There's only one way to end this," he said, handing me a small, ancient-looking book. "Follow the rituals, free his spirit." I took the book, my hands trembling. The pages were filled with strange symbols and instructions. It felt wrong, but I had no choice. I had to try. That night, I prepared for the ritual, following the instructions meticulously. As the clock struck 3:33 a.m., I started the incantation. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened. Suddenly, I felt a presence in the room. "Mark, what are you doing?" Eric's voice was clear now, filled with fear. "I'm trying to help you," I cried, my voice cracking. "No, stop. You don't understand," he shouted, but it was too late. The ritual was complete. The room exploded in a blinding light, and I was thrown back against the wall. When I opened my eyes, Eric stood before me, his form flickering like a dying flame. "Eric, I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "It's not your fault, Mark. I should have left it alone," he said, his voice softening. "Can you forgive me?" I asked, my heart aching. "There's nothing to forgive. Just remember me as I was, not as I became," he said, smiling sadly. As the light faded, so did Eric, leaving me alone in the dark room. The text stopped, and the house felt empty, lifeless. I had done it, but at what cost? I left the old house, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The past had finally been laid to rest, but its shadows would haunt me forever. As I stepped into the night, I looked back one last time. The old house stood silent, a relic of forgotten secrets and unfinished business. I knew I'd never be the same, but at least I had faced the truth, no matter how terrifying it had been. The days following the ritual felt like a surreal blur. The text had stopped, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a semblance of peace. But it was a fragile peace, tainted by the heavy weight of what I had done and what I had seen. Eric was gone, truly gone this time, and the silence was deafening. Returning to my normal routine was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking in the shadows. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, my nerves frayed and raw. One night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at Eric's old phonon. It lay on the coffee table, a silent reminder of the nightmare I had endured. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The screen was dark, lifeless. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to let go. I powered it on one last time, intending to erase everything and put it away for good. As the phone booted up, a message notification appeared. My blood ran cold. It was from Eric's number, time-stamped at 3:33 a.m. My hands trembled as I opened it. Thank you, Mark. But it's not over. My heart pounded in my chest. What did it mean? Hadn't I freed his spirit? I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I needed answers. Desperation drove me to revisit the old house, hoping to find the caretaker and demand an explanation. When I arrived, the house looked even more decrepit, as if it had aged decades in just a few days. The door creaked open under my touch, and I stepped inside, the air thick with decay. I called out for the caretaker, but there was no response. I made my way to the room where the ritual had taken place. The strange symbols were still there, but now they seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. As I stood in the center of the room, I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath. Mark. The voice was unmistakable. Eric's voice. But it sounded different, darker, more sinister. Eric, what's happening? I thought I freed you. I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. You freed me, but you also freed it, he replied, his form materializing before me. But it was twisted, grotesque. What do you mean? I asked, fear gripping my heart. The ritual wasn't to free me, it was to release the entity that had trapped me. Now it's free, and it's using me as a conduit, Eric said, his eyes filled with a strange, otherworldly light. No, that can't be, the caretaker said. My voice trailed off as the horrifying realization sank in. The caretaker was part of it, Mark. He wanted this to happen. He needed you to complete the ritual, Eric explained, his voice filled with sorrow. Then how do I stop it? I asked, desperation clawing at me. You can't. It's too late. It's already begun, Eric said, his form flickering like a dying flame. I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant for this to happen. As his image faded, the room began to shake. The walls cracked, and a deafening roar filled the air. I stumbled out of the house, barely making it to safety as the structure collapsed behind me, consumed by the dark energy we had unleashed. I stood outside, breathing heavily, my mind reeling. The entity was free, and it was my fault. I had been a pawn in a game I didn't understand. The past had reached out, not just to haunt me, but to use me. And now, it was loose in the world. As I walked away from the ruins of the old house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked back one last time, and for a brief moment, I saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching me with glowing eyes. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. And I was left with the chilling realization that some things should never be disturbed, no matter how desperate we are for answers.